Welcome to our build series for our 4-inch scale Burrell DCC road locomotive traction engine kit by Steam Traction World of Daventry, England. This is supplied as a series of 30 fully machined kits to build a fully operational steam traction engine. For this video, we will be showing construction of the left-hand rear wheel, followed by the right-hand rear wheel. These are kits 4 and 5 in the series.
I can do a trim right here, carefully, and I can just peel right off. Oh, I see.
These kits initially arrived missing the outer hub castings. The left-hand wheel, Kit 4, arrived in April. The right-hand wheel, Kit 5, began its journey to our home at the beginning of May. After an extended customs delay, it arrived at the beginning of June, but only the hub, spokes, and hardware initially were delivered. The wheel rim spent an additional 21 days traveling 3 times between Indianapolis and our local distribution center, less than 10 miles from our home. Eventually, the wheel made it to our door. The back-ordered outer hub castings arrived at the beginning of August. Throughout these delays, Steam Traction World was very helpful in trying to get the packages moving through the shipping system. The delays were in no way the result of anything they did, and I'm grateful for their assistance in trying to resolve the issue with the shipper.
Don't wonder why it wound up in France. Oopsies. The cage, you want to be careful. More parts to paint. Oh, look at they're taped together, which is good. Okay, good. Oh, look at them. We definitely have to get the bath. Yep. Party?
Assembly follows many of the same tasks and techniques as the front wheels. The differences will be seen in the videos of the assembly which follow the unboxing. When fully assembled, each wheel weighs about 120 pounds.
The left side wheel. So you got the big rims coming too? Maybe, well, probably not tomorrow. Soonish. Soonish. Oh, hopefully before vacation. That's what I'm hoping. Okay. And I think there's a couple different parts on this one. Some instructions. Inner cover? Right hand inner. Yep. Yep. Slide back. Some room.
To help with the assembly and painting, we assembled a simple roller stand out of scrap wood, 2 diameters of plastic pipe, threaded rod, washers, nuts, and 4 ball bearings. The longer plastic pipe pieces were luckily just a slightly larger inner diameter than the outer diameter of the ball bearings. Nuts and lock nuts were threaded down either side of the bearings, separating 2 bearings on 1 rod about 1.5 inch wider than the width of the wheel. The tube was cut just a fraction of an inch shorter than this. 4 half-inch pieces of tubing of a larger diameter than the longer tubes were cut and placed over the longer tubes. The ends of the threaded rods were then passed through the wood side rails and nuts and washers used to secure the assembly. The short, larger diameter tubes provided a guide for the tire to help keep it centered on the rollers while being turned. This way, the rim doesn't rub against the wood, thereby avoiding any scuffs once the rim was painted. There were some small cosmetic voids in the welded bead between the wheel rim and flanges. JB weld was spread into these areas, then smoothed to provide a uniform bead along the whole rim. Other prep work beyond the usual part cleaning involved using a center punch to punch the tabs of each spoke to later allow each spoke size to be easily identified. The punch marks were done on the surface that eventually got bolted against the rim flange so they would not be seen. For the wheel rim, there was some excess rubber from the vulcanizing process that had to be trimmed from the side of the metal rim. That's it. Alright. I'm missing one pin, so for now, one will have to do. The assembly of the rear wheels differ from the front in a few ways. It is critical that the inner hub face is offset from the inner edge of the rim by about 16 millimeters or 5/8 inch. We happen to have some small grinding wheels of exactly the right thickness to use as spacers. The wheel was laid down on a flat surface with the braking band facing down. The grinding wheel spacers were then set at the center of the rim, then the rear surface of the hub was set on the spacers. Following the included diagrams carefully, the first set of spokes were placed in position between the hub and the rim flange. All spokes will rest against the inside of the flange such that the spokes are nearest the center of the rim. 4 spokes were secured to the hub, watching the spade of the spoke carefully during tightening to ensure it did not lift the hub from the spacers. These spokes were then pinned to the rim flange with temporary bolts to orient and center the hub. Each of the 4 spokes were then loosened one at a time, noting if the weld bead on the inner edge of the flange was interfering with the outer edge of the spade. Where it was, the mating edge of the spade had an angle ground and checked until it would clear the weld bead. The spoke was then checked to see if the spade rested against the rim flange, was raised above it, or is pressed against it, raising the hub in the process. Noting which way the bends in the spoke needed to be adjusted, it was then removed and placed in a bench vise. Each bend was adjusted as needed. When corrected, each of the 4 spokes, when screwed to the hub, just barely rested against the rim flange, no gaps or excessive pressure. We repeatedly checked the hub to be sure it was level and the spacers were not loose or excessively tight beneath the hub. The process was then repeated with all remaining spokes that mated to the top side of the hub. Temporary bolts were tightened to secure the hub in position. The entire assembly was then flipped over. All remaining spokes were adjusted the same as the first half. We wanted to prime and paint the mating surfaces of the spokes and rim. Painter's tape was applied to the tire along the edge of the rim. A permanent marker was used to number each spoke. The same number was applied to the hub and the corresponding location on the tape over the tire. This way we could disassemble parts for priming and reassemble them in the exact same orientation. Assembly began using temporary bolts to loosely fasten every other spoke to the rim. Once half of the spokes were attached to the rim, the hub was inserted and screwed to the other end of the spokes. There is an angled hole for the axle oiler that must be oriented correctly to the rim and spokes. It is also important to pay attention to which side the rim and spokes are attached to in relation to this hole in the hub. The instructions and included diagrams show this clearly.
Acceptable practice in athletics today. I talk to guys from every team that we played, and they don't have to take pills. And we beat them, don't we? I think maybe we better go down to the station and let the detectives sort this out. This is ridiculous. You got no grounds to take us in. I've got the stuff I took from the trader's office right out there in the trunk of my car. You wouldn't believe what's in there, guys. Yeah, I saw him down the hall. Sold some sort of mess over to him. And? Well, he thinks we might have something. He's all set to open up. Well, that seems to think so. He said they already had a little file going. Seems, some of the parents and the other players have been complaining. Hey, well, let's go. I told Gene to pick us up at 7. Hey, where are you off to? Oh, Pete's taking Gene and me to dinner. I'm starving to death. Well, it's no wonder you haven't eaten anything all day. You're gonna gripe about this. Why don't you just forget the whole thing? No, that's not. Well, are you coming? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't fly. Come on, give me your opinion straight. What do you think, man? So busy sometimes you finish the thing before she starts. Yeah, the other morning she pulled up the bed, and I was still in it. That's what Aiden was saying when he got it back from his own brother when it came. Oh.
I got it. My legs are tired than I thought. I feel old. No.
When the wheel was reassembled and all bolts tightened, we checked the position of the hub again by laying the wheel flat and verifying our spacers fit between the hub and floor as before, and the hub was level. At this stage, we discovered several of the spoke mounting screws in the hub were stripped near the beginning of the hole, so we could not firmly tighten the spokes to the hub. We tried longer screws intended for the hub's covers and found they reached better threads and held the spokes tightly. I ordered several longer screws from Steam Traction World for all affected holes. Much as with the front wheels, a batch of JB Weld was mixed up and one spoke at a time was removed. A generous portion of JB Weld was applied on the hub beneath the area where the center of the spoke attaches. The screws were then tightened completely, forcing out a quantity of the JB Weld. This was repeated for all spokes on one side of the hub. Next, additional JB weld was applied over the face of the hub before placing and securing the outer hub cap. The JB weld was checked and pressed around each spoke where it meets the hub and along the gap between the center hub and outer hub. On the full-size engines, the hub would have been cast with the spokes to form one piece. The intent with a JB weld is to fill all gaps between parts, then clean up the surfaces to create the appearance of a single casting. The screws holding the outer cap to the center hub were also covered in JB weld, then smoothed to conceal the screws completely. To ensure the hubcap screw holes did not fill with JB weld, the hubcap screws were repeatedly inserted, removed, cleaned, and reinserted until they came out cleanly. Once complete, the wheel was flipped and the process repeated for the remaining spokes and inner cap. Once set, the excess JB weld was carefully ground down around all joints to blend all parts and create the appearance the hub was one cast piece, with the spokes cast in place. The cotter studs were also inserted at this time into the outer hub for the left wheel. The right hand wheel is identical in assembly with only a couple deviations. First, there is no oil tube, oil cap, or cotter studs to install. Secondly, there are two drive pins that must be secured to the inner right-hand hub cap. The drive pins take 2 screws each. High-strength adhesive was applied to the pins and screws before securing them. A center punch was then used on each screw between the screw head and surrounding countersunk hole, with the goal of slightly deforming the interface to further ensure the screws did not loosen. We had only used 2 bolts between spoke and rim. The remaining 2 holes in each spoke were filled with the special rivet bolts, inserted and tapped home through the rim from the outside into the spokes. Machine nuts are included to secure these special bolts. Before tightening, permanent high-strength adhesive, which is included, was applied to the nuts. Once all center bolts and nuts were placed, the outer spoke bolts were replaced one at a time with rivet bolts. 1 bolt was replaced in each spoke all around, then the process repeated for the remaining bolts. Before painting the rivet bolts and nuts, more JB weld was mixed and a small amount applied to the top of each nut. Once dry, each nut was carefully ground using a rotary tool on a flexible shaft. The intent is to round over the nut head and blend it into the end of the bolt. When complete and painted, the nut will resemble the head of a rivet. The oiling tube and cap for the wheel hub, as supplied, did not fit to each other. We discovered a mismatch in the way the threads were cut in the tubes. Replacement tubes were sent from Steam Traction World and those fit very well. These were polished and fitted to the hub at this time. We primed and painted the wheel, then installed the oil tube and cap. The remainder of the right wheel assembly followed the left wheel assembly as described previously. Note that for the moment, we have only completed the red base color on the wheels. We will line the spokes and highlight the lettering on the hub covers at a later date. The next kit, Kit 6, is a down payment for the boiler, therefore there is no actual kit sent for that month. As a result, there will not be a video for this kit number. Our next kit to arrive was Kit 7, the tender. We are still working on this kit, so the video for that will follow sometime later. Coming up next, we will look at the assembly of Kit 9, the horn plates.